Hello, everyone, and a very warm welcome to today's Experts for Expats webinar on how to successfully move to Portugal from the US. My name's Alice, and I am your host for today. Welcome to our first webinar of the year. Today, we'll be covering all of the essential information that you need to know if you are an American citizen and you're considering or currently planning a move to Portugal. So the number of US expats moving to Portugal has increased by almost 240% from 2017 to 2022. And as of 2023, there were more than 14,000 US citizens living in Portugal. It's got affordable cost of living, a warm climate, stunning scenery, a relaxed culture, and an excellent healthcare system. So it is not a surprise that Portugal has become such a popular destination for US citizens who want to move abroad. So in this webinar, we are joined by 4 brilliant experts who are here to provide essential information around the types of visas available to Americans who want to move to Portugal, how to find a place to live, the tax implications you need to be aware of, both in Portugal and in the US. But before I hand over to our experts, I will just give a quick overview of how the event will work. So this webinar isn't just about information sharing. It is also an opportunity for you to engage directly with our experts. We encourage you to ask questions using the Q&A function or in the chat. Please don't share any personal or sensitive information, though. If you do need specific help, let us know and we can arrange a formal introduction to an expert. As an attendee today, you are not on camera, on audio, but you can communicate with other attendees and ask our panelists any questions via the chat. And we'll answer as many as we can after we hear from our panel of experts. And also, this webinar is being recorded for future reference. So if you can't stay for the whole thing, don't worry, the recording link will be shared with you after the event. So let's get started. Welcome to our panel of experts. I'd like to invite each of you to introduce yourselves and your expertise and tell us one common challenge that Americans typically face when moving to Portugal. So let's start with you, Gilda.
Hello, good afternoon, everyone. Good morning in the US. My name is Gilda Pereira, and I am the owner and the founder of the first migration agency in Portugal, which is now almost 11 years old. And we are used to make these, to try to make this move from one country to another easier. So we are here today to clarify your doubts, to explain the different ways that you have to move to Portugal.
Thank you so much, Gilda. Pedro.
Hello all, my name is Pedro and I am the director of the tax department of A. I'm a CPA and I'm an expert in Portuguese taxation and expatriate tax matters with 12 years experience in helping individuals with their tax obligations, with their tax issues when relocating to Portugal or leaving Portugal. One of the most common challenges is understanding the differences between the US and the Portuguese tax systems. The biggest concerns include residency rules, double taxation rules, and how US income streams are assessed in Portugal, which can be a complex matter and requires careful planning.
Thanks, Pedro. Philippa.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for inviting me. It's a pleasure to share the panel with my colleagues Gilda and Pedro from A, Josh, Rob, and Alice. So my name is Filipe Abreu. I've been a lawyer for 25 years now, currently specializing in migration and all related areas in A, the migration agency in Portugal, especially real estate, which is what brings me here today. So one of the most common challenges coming to Portugal from the US is precisely your home. So renting or buying, what are the requirements? What are the challenges?
Thank you, Philippa. And finally, Josh.
Hi, I'm Josh Katz. I'm the owner of Universal Tax Professionals. We're a U.S. tax firm specializing in taxes for Americans living or moving abroad. We would handle anything from annual tax filing to tax planning before the move. One of the biggest problems we see is coordinating taxes between two countries. So now that you have a second country, there's questions of who to file first, where to pay first, and when to file, and then coordinating that with a Portuguese accountant to make sure everything's done correctly and you're not paying taxes twice.
Thank you so much, Josh. So we will kick off today's discussion with the topic of visas. So Gilda, we'll come to you first. What are the main types of visas that are available to American citizens who want to move to Portugal?
Well, we have different type of visas, but for today's webinar I chose 3 of them, which are the most required by American citizens. So I'm going to talk about the D7, the D8, and the D2 types of visa. First, I would like to explain that because this is a very common question that is made from the American citizens. What is the difference between a golden visa and a D type of visa? So a golden visa is a residency permit that you are entitled to by making an investment. There are different types of investments. And with the golden visa, you don't have a minimum staying in Portugal. What does this mean? That you can invest and have a residency permit in Portugal, and the clock starts for you to have your citizenship process, to start your citizenship process, but you don't actually need to move to Portugal. So this can be a plan B for those who want to have a second passport, but are not willing or cannot change to another country right now. If you want to move to Portugal with your family or by yourself, then we need to see what type of D visa is the most suitable for you. So let's start here with the D7 visa, which is the most common one. The D7 visa, you can apply as long as you have passive income combined with some savings. And the law doesn't define how much you should have for savings. But according to our experience, the consulates are not going to give you an approval if your savings are going to be lower than 50 euros. Also, you should have, along with these savings, a Portuguese bank account with at least 20,000 euros. And you must show that you have the passive income, and this passive income can be rental from a property, royalties, interests from your investments, and intellectual property. And those combined or alone, the passive income needs to be equal or superior than the Portuguese minimum wage, which in 2025 is 870 euros. If you are applying with someone else, you need to show that you have the Portuguese minimum wage plus 50% for the other person. For instance, if you are a couple. If you have children, you need to add to this amount 30% of the Portuguese minimum wage, which is again 870 euros. Also, to apply for this type of visa, you need to show that you have a Portuguese rental agreement in advance. So you need to show to the Portuguese consulate that you have a place to stay once the visa is approved. This makes a lot of confusion to people because you need to invest in a rental agreement before you know if the visa is going to be approved or not. But this is the way it is, and those are the rules. If you don't have any passive income, but you are able to work remotely, you can apply for the D8 visa, also called as the digital nomad visa. For the D8 visa, you will need to show that you have an income that equals to 3,500 euros. And you need to show that you had this income in the past 3 months. And this income can either be from an independent activity or if you are an employee. But in case you are an employee, you need to have a statement from the company saying that you are able to keep your job even if you move to Portugal. And for the D8 type of visa, you don't need to show that you have savings because as you are having active income every month, that is not a concern that our government is going to have. So this is the D8 type of visa. Then we have the D2 type of visa, which can be considered in 3 different types. The D2 type of visa is the visa for someone that has an independent profession, such as an artist. They can apply for this visa if they show that they are able to still do their work once living in Portugal, or if you are an entrepreneur. If you are an entrepreneur, you need to settle a company here in Portugal. And after having your company settled and with the activity opened, showing a business plan that makes sense of what you want to do in Portugal, that your business most likely is going to be successful, you can apply for the entrepreneurial visa. Also, in this D2 type, if you have a an IT project, an innovative project, you can apply for a startup visa. And this startup visa needs your company to be incubated in a Portuguese incubator, such as Startup Lisbon, Startup Portugal, we have several, and they will issue like a green passport for the D2 visa, which is going to make things easier for you. So in resume, what we have here for the D types of visa is that all of them in common, D7, D8, and D2, they are residency visas, which means that they all have a minimum staying requirements in the country. So you can only be outside of Portugal in the time of the residence, the 2 years residency permit, 6 months consecutive or 8 months if interpolated. Okay, because all these D types of visa, they are granted for 4 months. And after the 4 months, you need to convert these visas into a residency permit. And the residency permit is going to be for 2 years and then renewal for 3 years. After 5 years, you can apply either for a residency permit that it's going to be for a long period, 5 years, or for citizenship. So this is common for all types of D visas. What is also common is that the D types of visa, you will need to become a tax resident in Portugal. And this Pedro is going to explain you further along in the webinar.
Brilliant. Thank you so much for that summary, Gilda. So before we move on to tax, Philippa, we're going to come to you next to talk about property. So what are the essential need to knows for US expats who are looking to rent or buy a property in Portugal?
Right, Alice. So renting or buying a property in Portugal for an expat can be an exciting process, but there are key things they should know to go through the process with security. So one of the first notes is Portugal, letting them know that Portugal is a formalist country, which means that all contracts must be written down and signed by the parties, some of which simply require private document, usually drawn up by a lawyer and signed Others require additional formalism, such as going to a notary, drawing up a public deed, for instance, if you want to buy a house. So to rent or to buy, we strongly advise you to find a professional to accompany you, a lawyer, a real estate agency, to go through the process to ensure that the deal is real, make sure there are some scams online, and that all the rules are followed. So if you choose to rent, lease agreements are written contracts and must include full identification of the parties, so both landlords and tenants. They also must describe the property, the street, police number, local parish, city, zip code, and they must show how long the contract will be for, the amount of rent, the amount of the deposit, and the method of payment, between other informations. And it's very important that people realize that in Portugal, the lease cannot be under 1 year, and that it cannot be more than 30 years, but can be renewed. So the landlord can oppose renewal by giving the tenant prior notice, depending on the length of the contract. The same applies to the tenant. However, on the side of the tenant, he can at any time inform the landlord that he wishes to end the contract before the period initially established. So to do so, he will have to keep the contract in force for 1/3 of the initial period and then give a prior notice of intention to leave. This is really important because some people sign not realizing that they have to keep the contract for 1/3 of the period, and it can be a long time if they change their minds. So regarding rents, no more than 2 rents should or can be demanded at the beginning of the contract, and the value of the deposit cannot exceed 2 rents. Some lords may ask a guarantee or proof of income, but these amounts cannot be exceeded. So regarding the utilities, make sure and confirm in advance if they are included. So don't be caught as surprised. So furniture is the same. If the rental includes furniture, we strongly recommend to make a register with photographs of the furniture, so we make sure the conditions they are on. So one issue that is important is also the increase of the rent. In Portugal, rent increases are regulated. So every year they can be increased according to a government law. However, the parties can also agree with an increase on the contract, and both cannot be added, but they will choose which one will be enforced. And also important documents that you need to confirm before signing a lease. A recent land register certificate that we can confirm who are the owners that will appear in the contract. So in Portugal, this information is public. We can see all properties and we can identify all owners. Energy certificate, it's also a mandatory license of use as a residential property. So it cannot be a shop if you want to live there. And some final notes for a lease if all the contracts must be fulfilled after signed by the parties. So in case of non-compliance, the injured party can exercise its rights in court. So make sure everything is complied. So if you choose to buy a property, note that popular areas like Lisbon, Porto, and Algarve are more expensive at the moment. However, smaller towns and rural areas offer affordable options and they are getting more popular. So we also recommend that you use real estate agencies to ensure that the deal is real. Make sure that you search, if you search online, visit the agency and check if they have the license for this activity. They are called the AMI license. So pay attention, online scams. So in order to formalize a purchase and sale, a public act is required, which can be, we call the public deed of purchase and sale, and it's executed before a notary, that it's a public worker. The purchase begins with the signing of a promissory contract of purchase and sale, and these signatures at the moment, and this is really mandatory, must be notarized by a lawyer or notary. So if anyone tells you that you don't need to notarize, you make sure you do so. This promise will be fulfilled in the deed, which is the act in which the property is transferred and where the buyers must be present or represented by someone with a power of attorney for this purpose. So don't forget, be present or have a power of attorney with someone to represent you. We recommend that before signing this contract, you check that everything is validated by a lawyer, since once it's signed, must be complied under penalty. You can lose all the amount already delivered in favor of the seller. So the date, place, and time of the deed is communicated by the seller in writing, and the rest of the payment of the price will be made by bank check, which may take up to a week to be issued. So make sure the funds are in Portugal in a good time. And this day, the day of the deed, the keys will be delivered and you will be a happy owner of a property in Portugal. So at the same time, several documents will be presented and delivered from the seller to you. It's like a file containing all the information of the house. It's the land register certificate, the energy certificate, land booklet, housing data sheet, and documents issued by the condominium if it's a flat, stating there are no debts pending. All will be for you. So some final numbers that I think it's important to have an idea about the cost that this can involve. So down payment, typically 10-20% of the purchase price. Property transfer tax paid in the deed varies between 0 and 8% depending on the property value. And the stamp duty always paid on the deed, it's 0.8% on the purchase price. So the notary registration that is done by the notary and lawyer's fees, roughly 1-2% of the property price, and the annual property tax that everyone needs to pay, it's between 0.3-0.8% on the property's taxable value. One final note for the ones that are looking for a loan. So foreign buyers can also apply for mortgages in Portugal, but be expected to provide proof of income, tax returns, and it can vary from bank to bank. It's always important to evaluate several options and consult several banks. But we can advise you, and we can tell you now that usually there are no financing at 100% of the value. So I hope I have clarified some of your main doubts, but feel free to ask further questions. Thank you, Alice.
Thank you so much, Philippa. So moving on to tax now, Pedro, we'll come to you. What are the main Portuguese tax liabilities that US citizens who are moving to Portugal need to be aware of?
Thanks, Alice. Well, one of the first considerations is Portuguese tax residency. Portugal determines residency based on the 183 days rule. So if you spend more than 183 days consecutive or not in any 12 months period, you will be deemed resident in Portugal from day one, from the beginning. So many people think that it's after 6 months now, but it's from day one. Or, for example, having stayed in Portugal for less time, if you own a house rented or owned, that's in conditions that suggest that you have the current intention to maintain it and occupy it as your habitual residency. That will also trigger tax residency. But in general, it's a self-assessment. So people self-declare themselves tax residents when they fulfill one of these tests and they wish to become tax residents. But one has to watch out for these. As tax residents, you are subject to worldwide taxation. So meaning you must report income from all global sources in Portugal. The Portuguese income tax is, we have what it's called a progressive system, which means that the more money you make, the more higher the percentage of tax you will pay. And these tax rates will range from 13.25% all the way up to 48%. And that's on income from jobs or self-employment or even pensions. Retirement, rental income and capital gains or other investment income may be subject to different taxation rules, so not progressive. Retirement accounts, which are very popular amongst US citizens, you don't pay taxes until you take the money out. And you can have different tax liabilities depending on the specifics of your retirement plan and how money is taken out. That's why in this case, it's so important to talk to a tax advisor who knows very well the specifics of the tax, the retirement plans. Did you know, for example, that it's possible to pay only 11% on your retirement account drawdowns in Portugal? And this is not considering the foreign tax credit that may eliminate any taxation in Portugal. Then you have also social security contributions if you are going to work in Portugal, if you have a job, or if you have a self-employment remote work, for example, you must also register for social security and make contributions according to the Portuguese tax rates for social security. It's possible that if you have a US job, you can have an agreement where you don't pay taxes on social security, but these are exceptions to the rule. Also, in terms of tax liabilities and considerations, it's also important to consider the tax treaty between the US and Portugal. So we have a tax treaty in place to avoid being taxed on the same income in both countries. However, US citizens, they remain subject to US worldwide taxation, as my colleague Josh will explain later. And they may need to claim any foreign tax credits or foreign earned income exclusions. Because the US citizens, they are taxed on the citizenship criteria, which is different from other tax treaties. In terms of wealth tax, this is a good news. So Portugal, there is no wealth tax besides a property tax. As my colleague Filipe was explaining, we pay property tax on real estate, but it's very low compared, for example, with the US real estate tax. And there is also an extra tax in real estate, but that's for very high value properties. Also, good news in terms of tax liabilities in Portugal is that we have no inheritance tax, which comes as a surprise to many people, because we have, if assets are being transferred to close relatives, for example, for spouses or to children or to parents, we have no inheritance tax. Also, something interesting is that we have no taxation on long-term holdings of crypto assets. So if you are a crypto asset holder or investor, you have exemptions for holdings of more than 12 months. So these are the main highlights and the main considerations that I would like to point out in this webinar regarding the Portuguese taxation. And let me know if you have any questions.
Thank you so much, Pedro. So now, Josh, moving on to you, similar question, really. What are the US tax implications that US expats moving to Portugal need to be aware of?
Sure. So Pedro kind of started to mention that Americans who are living abroad or any Americans are taxed on their worldwide income. So a lot that comes sometimes as a surprise for Americans who moved abroad or move abroad, say, hey, wait, I'm not living in the US. Why am I paying tax in the US? Well, you're not necessarily paying tax in the US, but the US system requires you to report your income every year, and that's income from any source, regardless of where you're living. But again, there are ways to make sure that you're not going to be paying twice. That's also assuming you're over the threshold. So you have to earn a certain amount of money before you pay, and that amount of money will, the amount of income will change depending on your filing status. But there are lots of ways to reduce that amount to make sure you're not double paying, and we'll talk about that in a minute. So the annual tax return, the Form 1040, most Americans are familiar with filing the 1040 because they were filing in the US. Now you're moving to Portugal, you're going to be filing the same Form 1040. In addition, though, if you have a foreign bank account, so a bank account in Portugal with over $10,000 in it, or if you have several bank accounts and the sum is $10,000 or more, then you'll need to file what's called the FBAR form. That will need to be filed every year with the Department of Treasury, whereas your tax return is filed with the Internal Revenue Service. The FBAR is filed with the Department of Treasury. If you have over $200,000 in foreign financial assets or bank accounts, this would include a foreign pension, then you'll also have to file what's called the Form 8938. This is a FATCA form that's filed with your tax return. These amounts will change depending on ownership and if your filing status as well. There are kind of harsh penalties for failure to file these forms, so it is important to file the FBAR every year and file it on time. The FBAR is not too difficult to file. It's just kind of a list of your bank accounts. The tax return, though, we work with lots of clients who said, I filed my own tax return in the U.S. Can I file it in Portugal? Well, that's going to become a lot more complicated once you're dealing with two tax systems. Now, the first thing to the number one question is, how can I make sure I'm not paying taxes twice? And there are a few ways. So the first is called the foreign earned income exclusion. The foreign earned income exclusion allows you to exclude up to, for 2024, I think it's $126,500 from your income. So assuming you earned less than $126,000, you can just kind of exclude that. It's as if you didn't earn anything and you would not be required to pay any U.S. tax on that income, but you have to meet one of the two tests. The two tests are the bona fide residence test and the physical presence test. Physical presence test is a certain number of days you had to be out of the U.S. And the bona fide residence test is if you're a resident of Portugal based on some factors that the IRS gives. Both of these tests, you're allowed to prorate the exclusion, so you don't need to if you move in the middle of the year, you can still use the exclusion for half of the year, half of the amount. And then the other test, the other way to reduce your income, the second main way, I guess there are others, would be using foreign tax credits. So that would be taxes paid in Portugal. So if you say, hey, I already paid taxes in Portugal, well, those taxes can be used as a credit against what you would owe in the U.S. If you earn above $126,000, you can use the foreign income exclusion on your first $126,000, and then you can use foreign tax credits on income above that amount. Because of the high tax rates in Portugal, most Americans who move abroad to Portugal won't be paying a lot of tax on their wage income. They may be paying tax on other types of income, for example, U.S. sourced income, but then those taxes they pay to the U.S. can be used as foreign tax credits in Portugal. So the main thing to remember is you're not going to be paying taxes twice. You may be paying taxes at the higher rate, right? Because if one country has a higher tax rate, you won't have enough foreign tax credits to completely reduce that amount, but you're not going to be paying taxes twice. I know that Pedro said for Americans who are paying taxes, the tax rates in Portugal, the highest tax rate sounds scary compared to the U.S. rate, but you're not going to be paying anything usually on top of that. So that's good to remember. The next question is when to pay taxes. So overall, the deadlines are similar to the U.S., whereas April 15th is the tax deadline. What's important to remember is that's not only the deadline to file in the U.S., it's also the deadline to pay. So even though you can file an extension, which will allow you more time to file your taxes, it's not a deadline to pay. So sometimes for Americans who are moving abroad, this can be an issue because they are waiting for their Portuguese taxes to be complete before finalizing their U.S. tax return or even knowing how much they're going to owe. So there are ways to deal with this by planning, by paying estimated payments, by paying maybe being conservative and paying more than you think you would owe, and then you'll get a refund after when you do file. But there is a extension for Americans living abroad till June 15th, and then you can also file for extension, which will give you till October 15th to file your taxes. For lots of clients we work with, I find there are two types of individuals who are moving to Portugal. One, based on their taxes, the first would be Americans who plan to move to Portugal at an age where they plan on continuing to work, and then the second one would be Americans who are retiring in Portugal. And the tax situation can be very different for each of those. And when your income is from, if you're working in Portugal, your income is going to be sourced to Portugal. And if your income's if you're retiring in Portugal, you still may have a lot of U.S. income. So then you're dealing with U.S. retirement accounts, U.S. Social Security, and that's going to change the way you're going to file in terms of where you're going to file, where you're going to use those tax credits. And then lots of there may be a mixed category of Americans who move to Portugal are working, but also maybe receiving other types of passive income. This could be rental income, or maybe they're drawing from retirement, or other types of investment income, such as capital gains. And so these need to be carefully worked out with your Portuguese tax advisor and U.S. tax advisor to determine where you file first. And it's not usually all or nothing. So sometimes you'll file some income first in the you'll start prepare estimates for income based in one country, supply those to your accountant in another country. They'll file the return, and then the accountant in the first country will receive the final amounts, and then use those as foreign tax credits in your first country. So that's where things can really become complicated, and where it is difficult to coordinate. And I would say that's where it can be difficult to do everything on your own. A question I get all the time is, can I do this on my own? And the answer is possibly. So for, if you've been doing your taxes, you're up to date, you're very familiar with the forms, and you're in a situation where you're only earning wage income from America, you're only earning wage income in Portugal, you're in a much better shape to give it a go on your own. Lots of the clients we work with, I'll tell them, give it a go on your own. And if you can't figure out, they'll come to us. But it depends. It depends on a lot of factors in terms of sources of income. And again, the coordination with your Portuguese accountant. Another question I get all the time is about state tax residency. So when you're moving abroad, right, I would say for our clients, they'll come to us either after they moved or before they moved. We do, compliance, and we'll also work with planning. So if they've already moved, sometimes you don't have the same type of planning opportunities. But if you haven't moved, one question we get a lot is state tax residency. So there are ways to sever state tax residency officially by possibly officially moving your address to a state without state taxes. That's one option. And the IRS gives, there's not one step to take, but there's a criteria of guidelines that will help determine you sever ties with state tax residency. I'd say everyone would agree California is the worst. So if you're from California, you might want to take a little extra effort to sever your residency. Other states aren't the same, and it can be worth it, but it's going to depend also on your tax situation, what you have, what type of assets, and what access the state might have to tax those assets. And then another question we get all the time is from Americans who have been living in Portugal and say, "Wait, I've been living here for several years and I haven't been filing my U.S. taxes because I had no idea." So if you're in that position, the IRS has a program called the Streamlined Filing Program, which is the easiest way to get caught up. Instead of filing for all the years you failed to file, you would only have to file the past 3 years, past 6 FBARs, a certification of non-willfulness. After that, the IRS will consider you up to date and will waive all penalties. So it is definitely the program we would recommend for most Americans who are living abroad in Portugal and didn't know they had to file. I would say those are the main. One more thing, I don't want to take up too much time, but opening a business in Portugal. So opening a business in the U.S. can be quite simple. Opening a foreign business for an American has a lot of complexities. You'll have to file this Form 5471. There's possible GILTI tax implications, which is a tax on the retained earnings of the business, and it requires a lot of planning. So the best thing to do if you're planning on opening a corporation in Portugal is to work with an accountant to make sure you understand. And it's not just one-sided. So when we work with clients, we'll say, from a U.S. tax perspective, we recommend this and this and this. But in Portugal, they might recommend something different. And then we'll work together to decide, okay, well, what's the best way for this American to file? And I'll leave it at that for now and open it up to any questions when you're ready.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Josh. And if you have any questions for any of our panelists, please do feel free to put them in the chat or use the Q&A function. I have got some questions already. The first question actually leads on from what you were just saying, Josh. So this potentially is a question for both yourself and Pedro. So if I have a company in the US already, what do I need to be aware of tax-wise when I move to Portugal?
Okay, from a Portuguese tax perspective, if that company is like a single member LLC or an S Corp, where you get taxed on the pass-through regime, in Portugal, that income is deemed dividends income. Like when you received the profits from the company, you have shares, you receive the profit. So in Portugal, this is called dividends income. And it's taxable in both, according to the treaty, it's taxable on both jurisdictions, so the US and the Portuguese one, which is good because it allows you to claim a foreign tax credit in Portugal or the other way around. It's possible also to do to claim in the US, as Josh might indicate this. So the implication is that it's going to be treated in Portugal as dividends.
I'll add to that when we go over what the rules are for the foreign income exclusion, a lot of times Americans who own companies don't know that it will also apply to income that they, self-employment income that they earned from a self-employment income, first of all, or employment income from a company that they own, or income from a pass-through entity. The question is going to be, where is it sourced? And the sourced is going to be where they were living or sitting when they earned the income, and then that would make it then become income from Portugal.
Great, thank you. So we'll jump back to visas now, to you, Gilda. We've had a couple of visa questions. So the first one is, I'm hearing there's a backlog of 350,000 visas to be processed in Portugal. Firstly, is this true? And secondly, if so, how long is it going to take for my visa to be processed?
Okay, I'm so glad that this question was brought up, because there is a lot of confusion about this. So this backlog on the process are not visa process. Those are residency permit process from people that were already in Portugal and were trying to legalize their situation here. But we are talking about people that came without a visa and applied for a certain residency permit with a work contract. And yes, this has a huge backlog. However, the Portuguese authorities are working on this now, and they made a task force, and now they have temporary IMA offices that are addressing this type of processes. So we hope that by June, all of this is being taken care of, because they extended the residency permits and the visas until the end of June 2025. So it's expected that with this task force made by the government, everything is going to be sorted out by then. We already feel that there is a lot of improvement in this. Also, this applies to the golden visa, but they also made the task force for the golden visas to be approved. And we in our office already got notified from this task force to our clients' process that were on hold for a long time. So we believe that this is going to be sorted out in a short period of time. Also, one thing that I would like to mention is that some of these processes that are on hold are family reunification process. But now, 2 years ago, the law has changed, and when you apply to a visa in your consulate, you are also able to apply for a visa for your family. So you won't have to wait this time, and once you have a visa, your family is going to have a visa as well. So yes and no. We have a backlog, but it's not for visas. Your visa is going to be approved by the consulate of your residency, and it's not going to take longer than 3 months.
Thank you. There's been a lot of misinformation I've seen on that.
Yes.
So thank you for clearing that up, Gilda. That's great. And then just one more question we've had on visas. What type of residency visa can I apply for if I'm receiving retirement income?
So if you are receiving retirement income, that would be the D7 visa. You should apply it in your home country, in the consulate years where you have your residency.
Great, thank you, Gilda.
You're welcome.
Now one for you, Philippa. Question on whether there's any particular areas of Portugal that are more popular with US expats.
So, Alice, Lisbon and Porto, of course, very requested areas, but as I mentioned, they are quite expensive now. But we are seeing a lot of our clients going through cities around these main cities, like Óbidos, Castelo Branco. Also, we have a lot of clients going to Algarve. It's an excellent area as well. And you have a lot of support in with different things, with services, hospitals. So you can search outside Lisbon and Porto for a lot of cities that are very secure and affordable as well.
Wonderful. Thank you, Philippa. Slightly related to that as well, a tax question for you, Pedro. Are there different tax rules in different regions of Portugal that people should be aware of?
Thanks, Alice. No, not really. So in terms of individual taxation, we don't have like there is in the US the state's tax. No, we have only the national tax rates. Well, only for companies there is a very small tax that is applicable to regions. There are, however, tax deductions that are granted depending on the regions. This can go up to 5% of your total tax collection. You can get a benefit, a deduction of 5% of your tax collection, depending on the region, on the city. And of course, but even Lisbon is giving the highest deduction possible, and also Porto. So every city is disputing this tax credit, so which means they maximize the benefits they give to incomers.
Brilliant, thank you. A couple more tax questions as well. Josh, one for you. So Pedro mentioned that there's no inheritance tax in Portugal, but would you need to pay tax in the US on inheritance in Portugal?
Possibly, but it's a very, very high threshold. So you would have to have a very large inheritance to worry about that. And if you have that, if your inheritance is that big, then you're going to want to speak to someone who specializes in specifically inheritance planning. But I would say the answer would be technically yes, it is possible.
Great, thank you. And another one for you, Josh. How does the US tax you on Portuguese investments?
It would be similar to, it would be the same way you would be taxed in the US. So what you would need to do is convert those investments, to as if they were in the US. But and then you could apply the foreign tax credit. So capital gains, interest, dividends, those would be taxed, first in Portugal because they're based in Portugal, and then after that we could use foreign tax credits. So it's very possible you wouldn't pay any tax. But if anything is taxed or treated differently, then we would kind of look at them as if they were, U.S. investments based on the U.S. tax code.
Thank you, Josh. Just looking to see what other questions I have. Another tax question. Tax is always a popular subject here. Pedro, this one for you. Are interest and capital gains generated inside my IRA or 401k taxable in Portugal?
That's a good question, and it's frequently asked. No, it's not. So if it's inside your retirement plan, it's not taxable. It's like a separate entity. So the taxable event comes the same way it is a taxable event in the US. It's when you draw down. So when you take money out of your retirement plan, that's when it's taxed.
Thank you. Just looking for other questions we've had. So someone's asked, can we work with Experts for Expats to help with applying for a D7 visa here in the US, or is there a direct link you can recommend for the Washington, DC area? So I'm guessing, Gilda, we would refer people to you for that kind of support.
Yes, of course. And we have lots of experience with with the Washington DC consulate, as well as others, but especially with the Washington DC, we have good experience with them.
Brilliant, thank you. And I've just seen your message, Gilda, saying you'd like to also add a note about company incorporation as well.
Yes, I would like to add a note about the company incorporation in Portugal. As Josh said before, it is not an easy process, but in our company, we have a specialized team just in company incorporation. And then, of course, we have Pedro that will take care of all the tax issues about this company incorporation. But it's something that, especially if you are applying for a D2 type of visa, you need to combine the knowledge of someone that can incorporate a company in Portugal with the knowledge of someone that can help you to apply to this D2 type of visa. And I'm saying this because sometimes we have clients that had already incorporated a company, and then they come to us to apply for the D2 visa, and we need to either to redo the company or close that one and start a new one. So if you want to save time and money and you are thinking about incorporating a company in Portugal that makes sense for your move to Portugal, please be in touch with our team.
Wonderful, thank you. Josh, a similar question for you on what you're able to help with. Are you able to help US individuals prepare their 2024 US taxes if they're still living in the US but planning a move to Portugal?
Yeah, we work with lots of Americans who haven't yet made the move, and it really helps us to give better advice for planning and help them with it. You know, when we receive questions, we're only able to, and we have not prepared the return or seen any of their documents, we're only able to, do our best in answering and give very general advice. But once we've prepared a return, we can answer much more easily, much more quickly. And also we try, we don't have to necessarily charge for advice, but if they say, okay, we haven't done their taxes and it's a whole big process, that becomes a whole to do just to catch us up to that point where we would be at had we prepared the return. So the answer is definitely yes. And I think it's recommended.
Brilliant. Thank you, Josh. And for anyone, if you have any questions or need help with anything that we've discussed today in the webinar, you will be getting a follow-up email with you with links to request an introduction in all of the areas that we've discussed today. So that will allow us to assess your personal situation and match you with the expert who we think is best. So you will get some information on that after the webinar as well. I've got one more question so far, just before we finish up, unless we have any other questions come in. Philippa, back to you for this one. Are there any restrictions on mortgages that US expats need to be aware of? So if they're getting a Portuguese mortgage, are there any restrictions that would apply to non-residents?
No, Alice. So the bank, of course, will evaluate clients, and even so they will ask for income source proof, tax returns. And remember that in Portugal, the flat or the house will be a guarantee for the bank. So if anything happens, they will make sure that the house has enough value to cover the credit. So they will do their due diligences and evaluate the client.
Wonderful, thank you. So I can't see any other questions today, which is wonderful. We've managed to answer everyone. So thank you so much to everyone who's joined us live today. Thank you so much for your questions. Thank you, Gilda, Philippa, Josh, and Pedro for coming along today and sharing your expertise. So for anyone that's watching, if you would like to book in a discovery call with any of our experts to help with your relocation to Portugal, you'll find links in the chat that was shared earlier to complete a form to request an introduction. We'll also email all of these links to you after the session so that you have them. You'll also find plenty of blogs, guides, resources, and upcoming events on our website, expertsforexpats.com. If you're looking for advice in anything we discussed today or any other areas of expat tax, finance, wealth management, relocation, we'll do our best to match you with an expert who can help you. So thank you so much again to everyone for attending today. Thank you so much to our panel, and I hope you all have a great rest of your day.